Hi everyone, it's Sandra and this is Cinderella. I'm going to be feeding Cinderella this. Can you guess what it is? It's a new one for Peggy Hebling from Peggy Hebling's Garden What You've Got. Peggy, I don't think you're composting this yet. Cinderella is munching her way through one of my cotton t-shirts that has some polyester lace on it, so she will have a lace collar at the end of it. For those of you who don't know, Cinderella lives in my kitchen. She's my bin that gets atypical bedding for the most part. Here I'm just going to remove these bits of cardboard that I have down the side to soak up some extra moisture, but there's going to be worms and wisp in them. So they're going to reappear at the end when I give Cinderella her feeding for the day. This is also a back-to-back video, meaning I'm going to show you what I feed Cinderella today. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you what happens 2 weeks later. So like I said, Cinderella gets atypical bedding sources. So she gets both my and my husband's haircuts. She gets our tissues that we use and we just toss them in the top of the bin. Non-greasy paper towels, maybe some tissue paper from a gift. And she gets a lot of flowers that we display in bouquets, either in our kitchen or on our dining room table. Cinderella cycles very quickly. Her worms can produce castings faster than any of my worm bins. And I think that comes from the microbial diversity from all the different bedding sources. Now, obviously, the very best microbial diversity would come from manure or some pre-compost or some compost itself. But with Cinderella, I'm just looking to use up things that find their way into my kitchen, like these flower stems. You can see the worms use them like a jungle gym. You might think that by the time flower stems go into my bin that they're more of a carbon than they are a nitrogen source. But there's one thing about the CN ratio, and that is, did the plant die naturally? Like, did it come to the natural end of its life, like leaves falling on the ground in the autumn? Or in the case of these flowers, were they picked while they were still alive and they died because they basically couldn't take in enough water and nutrients through the vase? In that case, the plant still has a lot of vibrant enzymes in that stem and is slightly more towards the nitrogen end of the carbon to nitrogen ratio than would otherwise be the case if the rose had died naturally on the bush. So whoops, she does it again. I've got a surprise for Cinderella. I'm stacking up the vermicompost high on the edge of this 10-gallon tote because I'm going to give her even more flower stems. You can see from this dozen roses that the leaves are still green. They died while they were in a vase of water. These roses did not come to a natural end of their life cycle. So even though they look dry and crispy, I have to assume there are still some living enzymes, and which means living proteins, in those stems. I'm really taking the lazy route here. I'm just pushing it down, trying to get them as deep as possible so I can feed on top. Remember, I'm going to bring you back in just a minute or so to show you what happened after the worms got into these flowers. That food contains some carrot peels, avocado peels, some tea leaves, and some pulverized eggshells, hopefully moistened enough to get those roses and rose leaves well underway. I'm also going to put the cardboard that I pulled out from around the edges that has a little bit of the bin juice already on it, so it shouldn't last very long. And of course, my last thing is that surprise item. You may have guessed that it's the cotton from the top of a vitamin bottle, but I also wiped it around my bowl after I'd finished eating some defrosted berries. So let no juice be wasted. The worms are going to benefit from a lovely fruit juice soaked piece of cotton from the top of a pill bottle. I'm going to cover this up as best as I can. There's no way those stems are going to fit all the way into the vermicompost, and I will bring you back right away to show you what happened 2 weeks later. Okay, here we are. Let's just remove Cinderella's bubble wrap. I see a worm going through the channel on these tracks. That tells me the moisture is pretty good in the bin because normally worms don't crawl up there. It also tells me I'm going to have to be a little careful removing this t-shirt because if worms made it up to the bubble wrap, there's likely to be worms in the t-shirt as well. I'm just going to give it a quick shake here and try to get all the worms off and then put it somewhere safe while I tend to the bin. So it's no surprise that the long rose stems are still visible, and ouch, no surprise that they still have thorns on them. So let me grab them a bit lower and pull them out of the bin. They are not a bouquet anymore. In fact, there's worms all over them, but where are the dozen roses? And all those leaves, they're gone 2 weeks later. As impressive as that is, I still want all these rose stems to be vermicomposted. And so I need to do something because getting these big stiff stems into this bin is just not going to happen. They don't want to bend. So I've grabbed my kitchen shears and I'm going to cut the part of the rose stems that no worms have been near up into manageable chunks. Cutting them up will not only make them fit in my bin, but it will also give worms access to that center of the stem. So I'm going to speed it up a bit here, just so you see me make the final few cuts. And then remember, there were rose stems when I fed this bin 2 weeks ago, so I want to go in and check on those and see how they're doing. I'll just put the bubble wrap down here, and the rose stems were right along the side wall of this bin. I can turn them now up onto the bubble wrap and take a look at the progress. I can tell right away that the moisture in this bin is going to help soften those stems. There's lots of castings starting to accumulate, and they're actually starting to sink to the bottom as they do and kind of stick to the bottom of the bin a little bit. So I just got to dig them up with my fingers here. Clearly, rose stems are going to take an extended period because I think these stems must be about 4 weeks old by now. The same goes for these avocado pits, although this one is well on its way to being finished. So this was a lot of roses for Cinderella, and so my attention is now going to shift to these older stems to give a feeding on top of them to try to give them an additional boost to get them over the finish line, because I actually think this side of the bin could stand to have a little bit more moisture. It's actually difficult for a bin with lots of rose stems or any flower stems to have a moisture problem because they create air pockets everywhere. So part of the feeding today is that bag in the fridge that you find. It's cilantro stems that got out of control on me. Not edible for me, but the worms are going to love it, along with these banana peels. So the cilantro will be a fast food. The banana peels will take slightly longer. I'm just going to add some conventional carbon in there in the form of shredded cardboard, as well as a Kleenex. Next up, I'm just going to dump over all those oldest of the rose stems on top of that area to provide a good seal before I go back and look at all those rose stems that I just finished cutting up. I have to admit, at this point, Cinderella started looking like a forest where a fire had ravaged through a bunch of trees and there were trees lying all over the forest floor. I was beginning to worry that maybe this was too many roses. Rose stems are particularly tough and take the longest in a worm bin. Chrysanthemums, all of your bulbs, they go much more quickly. I've just got to aerate this end of the bin, and then I'm going to have to sweeten the pot for these rose stems that are just 2 weeks into this bin. Otherwise, they're going to be hanging around a long time. There are no signs of the rose leaves from 2 weeks ago or those dozen rose flowers, although I was surprised to find some of that inoculated cardboard that I put on top of the feeding just 2 weeks ago. So it appears the worms went for the leaves and the flowers before they went for the cardboard. Of course, we all know it's the microbes that go after it, but still, the net result is the same. So now that I've created a little pocket for these stems, I'm just going to add them into the bin and then top them up with some of those thawed banana peels to entice the worms to come over. I've given Cinderella a lot of challenges with this 24 roses. Hopefully the worms will be able to take care of this before too much time. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Please give Cinderella a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time.